In the third year of the famine, when the northern provinces of Japan lay scorched under a sky without mercy, villagers sold their daughters for rice and boiled tree bark for broth. Aki was the last child in his hamlet, not yet claimed by hunger, or conscripted into labor. His father had vanished in the grain riots. His mother died quietly one morning, curled around his feet like a dog seeking warmth. By the time the imperial men came dressed, not in armor but in spotless silk, had no one left to scream for him. They took the young, the symmetrical, and the silent. Aki, though thin and mud-smeared, had a face that halted the lead retainer mid-step, pale eyes beneath soot-dark lashes, a curve to the mouth that reminded the man of a court painting from years ago. He was lifted onto a palanquin without resistance, too weak to protest and too numb to understand. They didn't tell him where they were going, but it wasn't death, and in that silence he mistakenly believed he had been spared. In Kyoto, whispers had grown louder within the residence of Lord Fujiwara no Atsunobu. The nobleman had not spoken his son's name in 7 years. Sadamian, his beloved, had died during the smallpox outbreak. Atsunobu had buried him with incense and imperial prayers, then tore down his sleeping chamber and vowed never to look upon a face like his again, until Akio arrived. The astrologer had warned of a rebirth, a red comet in the sky, birds crashing into temple walls, the cherry trees blooming twice in a month, all signs, he claimed, that the soul of Sadamian had returned to the realm of men. When Atsunobu laid eyes on the ragged boy before him, his breath stopped. Aki did not understand the tears that welled in the nobleman's eyes. He flinched as the man reached out and traced the bruise on his jaw like it was a sacred relic from that day. Aki was no longer Aki. His hair was oiled and combed straight, his body scrubbed with cloths that scoured his skin raw. He was given a new name, Sadamuno-ke, the reflection of Sadamuno. When he spoke his own name, a servant struck him lightly on the hand and whispered, "That name no longer serves you." His peasant clothes were burned. He was dressed in pale silk robes, stitched with cranes and plum blossoms. Handed a mirror he didn't dare lift. They taught him how to speak in the dialect of the capital, how to lower his eyes, how to fold his hands the way the prince once did during poetry recitals. They played music he had never heard and watched his reactions. If he cried, they nodded with satisfaction. If he laughed, the music stopped. Every part of him that once belonged to a hungry boy from the provinces was shaved down, starved out, or replaced. The astrologer declared his training necessary, that the soul within him must be welcomed fully. He was told he was chosen, that he should be grateful. At night, he heard prayers chanted outside his chambers, not for his well-being but for his purity, as if his body were a vessel to be cleaned, hollowed, and offered. He pressed his hands to the tatami floor, bones aching, lips dry, and wondered whether the real Sadamian had ever been allowed to cry. Weeks passed. He began to dream in another boy's memories, tea ceremonies he had never attended, rivers he had never seen, and each morning when he was addressed as Sadam-no-ke, he answered without hesitation, not because he believed it, but because resistance had no place here. By the end of the second moon, he stopped searching for his reflection in water. It no longer resembled anything real. He woke before the bell, as he was trained. The silk bedding offered no warmth. Every movement had a rule: how to rise, how to fold the coverlet, how to step without sound. He followed them all. Breaking routine meant punishment, and punishment didn't always wait for an explanation. The compound was hushed, more shrine than home. Servants moved like shadows, heads bowed, speaking in halftones. Aki, still Sadamuno-ke by name, had become part of the furniture, dressed and displayed as if his presence alone calmed the Lord's spirits. His body no longer belonged to function but to illusion. Soft hands, smooth face, posture composed. He was a replica crafted from obedience and silence. He was not taught to think, he was taught to mirror, mimic the tilt of the head, the cadence of a phrase, the correct way to listen to a poem and cry just enough. He learned which incense to burn on winter mornings, which flowers were forbidden during mourning weeks, and which gestures the late prince used when presenting courtly gifts. These lessons came through correction, never kindness. The attendants who dressed him each morning avoided eye contact. Most had their tongues clipped or swore vows of silence. He did not know their names, and they never asked for his. Only one man ever spoke freely to him, Naomichi, an older youth with heavy eyes and a limp, once favored, now fading. He knew the routine of being replaced. His laughter was bitter and brief. Aki listened closely. It was Naomichi who warned him not to eat too quickly, even if starving nobles found such hunger distasteful. It was he who whispered how others had come before and vanished without ceremony. "We are not people here," he once said. "We are echoes, and echoes don't get funerals." Food was bland, cold, often minimal. Rice, pickled vegetables, weak broth. When sickness passed through the lower kitchens, the upper chambers were sealed off. If Aki coughed, his bowl was taken away for 3 days. Hygiene was ritual, not health bathing in ice water, oiling the skin with perfumed salves, enduring incense smoke until his lungs burned. Isolation was constant. No letters, no visitors, not even the stars at night. His windows covered with paper screens. Days blurred into one another, punctuated by ceremonies. He performed them all: the full moon bowing, the silent tea, the offering at the ancestral altar despite never meeting the man whose spirit he supposedly channeled. No one explained these rites, it didn't matter. Meaning was irrelevant, appearance was everything. Occasionally Atsunobu summoned him. The lord had grown quieter, his face creased with something like regret, though it never softened his control. He would speak to Aki with trembling hands, asking him questions meant for someone else. Do you still like the lotus pond? Why did you leave that night? Aki never answered, only smiled as trained. His silence made the noble cry. By the third season, Aki no longer remembered the voice of his mother or the smell of the rice fields in spring. Even dreams betrayed him, filled instead with courtly poems and the faint taste of powdered sweets. He walked without making noise. He spoke only when spoken to. He obeyed without thought. On rare moments alone, he pressed his fingertips to his face, tracing the features they all saw in him. Features that kept him alive but no longer belonged to him. He wondered whether death would have been simpler. At least then, he might have kept his name. Winter arrived without warning. Frost clung to the lacquered beams, and even the stone basins cracked in the cold. The silence that once kept Aki numb began to hum with something heavier in rest. Rumors drifted between sliding doors. That had fallen from favor. Whispers of misconduct, forbidden rites, and political betrayal traveled from the capital. What was once a sanctuary became a shadowed cage. The household tightened. Visitors stopped. Rice deliveries halved. The servants walked quicker, heads lower. Aki noticed changes in the lord's gaze. Where there had once been a desperate tenderness, but soft now sat suspicion. Atsunobu studied him longer, silently, as if trying to locate something missing. During one call, the nobleman asked, "Why don't you sing anymore?" Aki answered carefully, "Because I was never taught, my lord." The slap came without warning. Not hard, not cruel, but deliberate, a reminder. He used to sing, Atsunobu whispered. That night, the biwa was placed at Aki's door. He was expected to play. He had no teacher. He tried, fingers stiff with cold, notes faltering. Every mistake deepened the silence in the halls. The following morning, his sleeves were shortened, a silent message. He had displeased someone. His meals were delayed. The old guards replaced. The courtyard stopped blooming. Naomichi was gone. No announcement, no goodbye. Aki asked a kitchen girl. Her eyes widened. She dropped the ladle and never spoke to him again. Days later he was summoned and found the chamber stripped of color. No cushions, no incense, no mirrors, only Atsunobu wrapped in mourning robes, repeating, "He's slipping away again." Aki stood still as the man approached, brushed the hair from his eyes, and murmured, "You don't look like him anymore." A pause. "Perhaps you never did." The next day the astrologer arrived. He performed a ritual cleansing Aki's wrists in white cloth, chanting old sutras to drive out false spirits. For 3 days Aki was kept in a cold stone room, fasting and silent, the walls dripping from condensation, the cold chewing at his bones. No one came when he wept. The cloth at his wrists never loosened. When he emerged, the halls were empty. The estate felt abandoned, like a shell left behind by something dead. His robes were gray now. He was not summoned, not addressed, only given small tasks: arranging flowers, folding silk. His fingers trembled constantly. The music never returned. One night, a monk passed through the estate. He offered no blessing, only a question. "Do you know who you are?" Aki stared at him, lips dry. The monk waited. Then, gently, "It's time to return to silence." Later that week, Aki climbed the stairs to the highest veranda. He didn't jump, he only sat. The sky stretched wide and silver, he whispered. A name his own, the one no one used anymore, just once, to see how it sounded. It didn't feel real. The next morning the younger boy from a southern province began his training. A new name was whispered down the hall. Aki, unseen, stepped aside to let the procession pass. No one looked at him, not even the boy. He realized quietly he was already gone. Plague struck in spring. It moved fast, carried by rats in silence. Servants began collapsing near the kitchens. The physicians who arrived wore robes soaked in vinegar and spoke only to the noble families. Those beneath silken rank were left to quarantine without medicine, expected to endure or vanish without complaint. Aki wasn't told the details. He learned through absences, faces he no longer saw, names no longer whispered. Eventually, the bell stopped ringing for the morning prayer. The estate drifted into stillness. Atsunobu died within a week of falling ill. His death was not publicized. The body was cremated privately. No rites, no procession. An imperial decree followed. Days later, dissolving his holdings under suspicion of unorthodox practices, officials arrived with scrolls and wax seals, confiscating relics and dismissing anyone without documentation. Aki watched them from behind a paper screen, invisible again. One clerk pointed to him but didn't ask a name. He was tagged as an unregistered dependent, not a son, not a servant, not a citizen. No record existed of who he had once been. That was enough to condemn him. He was taken with others, quiet ones, discarded once, to a secluded monastery in the eastern hills. There was no trial, no protest. The monks who received them said little. only offered simple robes and a rule of silence here. Names were not used. The past was considered excess. Everyone who entered became the same. They called him Ryase, meaning cool clarity. It was the kind of name they gave to those they didn't expect to leave. The work was endless, clearing forest paths, sweeping snow from shrines, tending the graves of monks whose faces had long faded from memory. There were no mirrors, no fine cloth, no music, only breath, earth, and repetition. He didn't speak for months. There was no one to hear it, and no words left that hadn't already been spoken by others before him. The body that once held gestures, bows, and practiced smiles, now carried buckets and prayer beads. Time stopped. The seasons passed, not through celebration but through the ache in his hands. Sometimes remembered the face they told him he resembled, not clearly, only fragments: a pale neck, a curved brow, a laugh he never heard himself make. He didn't know if the prince had existed, or if the name was only ever a fantasy that justified his captivity. Either way, it had become irrelevant. The fire came during a lightning storm. The monks saved what they could: scrolls, relics, but many of the name plaques burned. In the chaos, Ryase was marked missing. No body was recovered, no ashes identified. The records were rewritten without him. A single line noted: one lay novice, presumed lost. He was not mourned. No one searched. The capital never inquired. His absence did not interrupt the prayers or the planting. By the time the next winter arrived, the estate where he was once adorned had been sold and repainted. The chamber where he had lived was converted into a storage room for calligraphy, brushes, and so he vanished. Not in violence, not in glory, not even in rebellion, just as a breath fades in the cold. Not erased, only overwritten. Like many before him, a name replaced, a face used, a body trained to reflect someone else's longing. In the end, there was nothing left that belonged to him, only silence.